invite you for a moment to close your eyes. Let's just focus all of our attention on our Father. Let's push aside any distraction. Let's offer him the praise that he deserves this morning for his goodness and his kindness and his love for us. We surrender all to you. We are your children. We will follow you. It's all joy. To know you isn't a burden. Diamonds bursting inside us. God of mercy, sweet love of mine, I have surrendered to your design. May this offering stretch across the sky. These hallelujahs be multiplied. Your love is like radiant diamonds bursting inside of me. Cannot contain. Your love will surely come find us like blazing wildfire, singing your name. Yeah. God of mercy, sweet love of mine, I have surrendered to your design. May this offering stretch across the sky. These hallelujahs be multiplied. God of mercy, sweet love of mine, I have surrendered to your design. May this offering stretch across the sky. These hallelujahs be multiplied. These hallelujahs be multiplied. Are you hurting, broken within, overwhelmed by the weight of sin? Jesus is calling. Have you come to the end of yourself? Do you thirst for a drink from the well? Jesus is calling. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Leave behind your regrets and mistakes. Come today, there's no reason Jesus is calling. Bring your sorrows and trade them for joy. From the ashes, a new life is born. Jesus is calling. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Know what I say. Is risen. Bow down before him, for he is Lord of all. Sing hallelujah. Christ is risen. What a Savior. Oh, what a Savior. Isn't he wonderful? Sing hallelujah. Christ is risen. Bow down before him, for he is Lord of all. Sing hallelujah. Christ is risen. Oh, come to the altar. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Oh, thank you, Jesus. You are greater than we deserve. There is no other name than the name of Jesus. The name of Jesus. Bear your cross as you wait for the crown. Tell the world of the treasure you found. He is the risen King. He is the risen King.
12:16 says, "Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Just the true power and beauty of that reality. That you and I can confidently, that we can boldly approach the throne of grace. Not because we have earned it, not because we have worked for it, not because it's our right, not because you're holy, and it doesn't go away because you're not. It doesn't go away when you have a rough week. It doesn't go away whenever you think you've disappointed God, because you didn't get there yourself in the first place. You see, our access to the perfect heavenly presence that provides healing, that answers prayer, that quiets a desperate heart, that calms a restless storm, is one that we have gotten to and have access to because of the grace of God. Because there's one who's gone before us, who is the Son of the Almighty, who paid the debt that you and I could never pay, but that we owed, so that we might be able to confidently enter His presence. To know that we have access, that we have permission, that we can come. And this isn't just a Sunday thing, right? This isn't just when we gather together, but this is you as a person, that you have permission to enter His presence. That under the name of Jesus, the name that is above every name, that you can humbly come before the throne and you can say, "Lord, heaven, I need you." And you can experience the wholeness that only comes from being near Him. It only comes from being in His presence. It only comes by being known by Him. And you can get there not because of something that you have done, but because of something that He has done. And so you can always go there resting, knowing that you are secure. Because the one who sits at His right hand intercedes for you. Come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. That we might not continue to take for granted the fact that we have access to the Most High God. That we can always go to Him. We can always seek Him. That He's always there, no matter what. Heavenly Father, we thank you. We thank you that we have permission, that we have freedom to come before you. God, we are so thankful that you are Emmanuel, God with us. Father, we thank you for your Son, for what He has done on the cross, for the fact that because of what He has done on the cross, that we have permission to come before you, to experience your presence, to experience your love. Father, we ask that as we dive into your word this morning, God, that you would come, that you would speak, God, that we would hear, Father, that you would move. Lord, it is an incredible privilege that we have to be in your presence. And so, Father, we ask that you just come now, that you would move. God, we thank you for this time of worship that we've had, God, to just come to you and cry out, to remind ourselves, Father, that the altar is open, that your arms are open wide, that we can't always come before you, God, to be received. Father, that it doesn't matter how long we've been running the other direction, or God, what it is that we're bringing to your feet, that you receive us with open arms. Father, we rebuke the lies of the enemy, Father, that we wouldn't be received. God, the lie that you don't love us anymore, the lie that we're not enough. We would be reminded of your truth, God, that you are enough. God, you have made a way. And Father, if it wasn't some standard that we met to get there, that there's not a standard we have to hold to stay there. we just have to simply accept your grace, accept your forgiveness, surrender to you. So Father, we ask that you just come and God, be with us this morning. God, speak that these would be your words and not mine. It's in your precious and holy name we pray these things. Amen. Well, good morning. So glad that you guys are here. It is so awesome to get together every single week and spend some time in worship and spend some time diving in the Word together. We're in a series that we're calling Unfinished, where we are looking at the story of Nehemiah and the rebuilding of the Jerusalem wall. And we're looking at that from the perspective of what does a move of God, what does a movement of God look like? Because that's our heart, that's our desire. That here at Axiom.Church, that as a church body, and then in each of your individual lives, that we desire to see God move, in mighty ways, to see him use you in ways that you can't imagine, to see what he might do here through Axiom.Church, to see how he might change Midland and bring about what we so desperately need. Knowing that we are not a perfect church, that we're never going to be a perfect church, but that we continue to work towards the goal that's been set before us. That while we will never finish this task, that we can always continue to move forward, continue to look to what the Lord is doing next, and continue to strive and seek the incredible mission that's before us. So far in the story of Nehemiah, we've looked at how it started and how it began with a heartbreak, that Nehemiah's heart was broken, that Jerusalem was in ruins, that there was a wall that had been destroyed, and as a result, there was no longer protection for the city, and there was no way for the city to rebuild. And so he goes to the king, because he has access to the king as cupbearer, finds his purpose, which interacts with the heartbreak, and finds his mission that was given to him specifically by God. He goes and they begin the work, and as they're working, opposition comes along, as it always does, trying to stop the work of God that is taking place. But instead of giving into that work, they lean into their call. The people of God lean into their call to continue building this wall, to continue working on this movement of God in their region. And then last week we talked about how a movement of God, in order to see it take root, in order to see it work, in order to find success, it takes everyone being all in. That it's not something that just a section of people can do, but that it will take an entire community, it will take an entire body, as the church is called in the New Testament, the body of Christ. That it will take all of us giving everything that we have, investing in what is worth our time, saying that we desire to see God move, saying we desire to see him work, and committing to that. So we're in week 4, and calling the message this morning, it's a heart thing. It's a heart thing. So this last week, I got the opportunity to attend the Global Leadership Summit, which is a international conference for leaders, not just church leaders, but leaders across the world, and leaders in corporate, leaders in churches, leaders in nonprofits, all kinds of different organizations, but all focused on good quality leadership. And several of the speakers were pastors, and a lot of them were Christians, and so a lot of what they talk about is kind of centered around the gospel, around what we see in Scripture, the dependence on Christ, the need for him to move in and through leadership, that no leader is truly whole and is truly complete without the sufficiency of Christ, because it's the only way to lead, not out of need of approval, but out of secure identity in him. But you get to hear from a bunch of different speakers from all kinds of places. And so one of the speakers that was there that I was really kind of super encouraged by and just loved hearing his story was a guy by the name of Richard Montanez. Richard Montanez. Now, Richard Montanez, he is a vice president for Pepsi Cola right now. He was an executive at Frito-Lay at one point in time, but his story is absolutely incredible. So he grew up in a labor camp His dad and his grandfather helped harvest grapes, and then their family lived in this labor camp with a bunch of other families. He grew up in the 60s, so he grew up around desegregation and remembers going to a Hispanic-only school and then was chosen as one of the children to go to what was a white-only school as they integrated and the difficulties that came along with that. And unfortunately, as he grew up, he ended up dropping out of school because he didn't really know English. And so then he just started working jobs. He was a gardener, was working at a car wash. And while he was working at a car wash, he had a friend who got a job at the local Frito-Lay factory as a janitor and told Richard about the opportunity. And so Richard applied, and he had to have his wife fill out his application because he didn't even know how to write in English. And so he took the application home, had his wife fill out, went in, met with the HR guy. The HR guy was like, "Did you fill this out?" He said, "Yes." And the HR guy looked at him and was like, "Man, you've got really nice handwriting." And so the joke was, he's like, "I started taking credit for my wife's work then, and I haven't stopped." But he eventually got the job, and he was so extremely excited and so proud because this was a quality job. This wasn't working outside. This wasn't a low-wage job. This was better than anything his family had seen up to this point. So he saw this as a legacy-changing opportunity. And he remembers going to his grandfather and telling his grandfather about it. And his grandfather's response was, "If you're going to mop floors, then you better mop floors better than anyone has before." That whenever they walk by those floors, they look at it and it's so clean that they know that it had to have been a Montanez man who did it. His grandfather taught him a lesson that he carried with him for the rest of his life, that in order to do something well, you have to do it with your whole heart. His story kind of continues, and what happens is an opportunity comes up. A CEO comes to visit them and tells them that he wants every employee to begin seeing themselves as an owner, to take ownership of the company, take ownership of what they do. And he takes that personally. Well, everyone else around him, he's a janitor. This is the bottom rung, right? He's not an executive. He's not a manager. He's a janitor. So all of the people around him were making fun of him, joking, because he took on that personal call. And they're like, no, Richard, he wasn't talking to you. You mop floors. You don't own this place. You mop floors. But he took it personally, and he took opportunities that he had presented to him to go on his days off with a salesman and help him stock shelves to learn what a salesman does. And one day while he was doing that, he noticed that next to their chip section was this spice section, and he noticed that the spice section was busy, and a lot of people were buying things. He's like, "Hey, people want spice in their life." And he looked at the Frito section, and at that point in time, they only had 3 chips. They had the Fritos, plain Fritos. They had the plain Lay's, and they had the plain Wavy. And he had this idea. What if we put spices on chips? Took them home to his wife, told her about it. She's like, "Oh, wow, that's a really great idea. That's really cool. How are we going to do it?" He's like, "I have no idea." And so a couple weeks go by, and he goes out, takes his son to a street vendor and buys some street corn, which is corn on the cob that's got chile and lime on it. And as he's eating the corn on the cob, he stops for a second, and he looks at the corn on the cob, and he's like, "You know what? This kind of looks like a Cheeto. What if we put chile and lime on a Cheeto?" So he goes home, tells his wife. She's like, "Well, all we can do is try it." And so he goes to work that next week, and he gets a bag full of Cheetos before they had the cheese put on them. And he takes that bag home, and they begin experimenting, adding different flavors and seasonings to these plain Cheetos to see what might happen. And when they finally get a mix that they think is really, really good and is what they've been looking for, he decides it's time. He gives the CEO a call. Now, I don't know how many of you guys in here work at some form of corporate structure, but most of the time, when you're on the bottom rung, you don't give a direct call to the guy on the top rung. There's like 3 or 4, in this size of a company, probably more like 50 people that you would go through before you got to the CEO. The president calls the CEO, the janitor doesn't call the CEO. But he calls the CEO, calls his direct line, gets his secretary, tells his secretary why he wants to speak with the CEO. She recognizes a potential opportunity, and so she goes and talks to the CEO and puts him on the line. And whatever it was that she said must have been something pretty special, because Richard said when the CEO got on, he was ecstatic. He was so extremely excited. He said, I hear you have a really good idea. So Richard pitches the idea of a chili-covered Cheeto. And the CEO says, you know what? I want you to put together a presentation. I'm going to come. I'm going to listen to you. And so he goes home, and he and his wife begin preparing. He's never presented anything in his life. Dude didn't even graduate high school. He barely knows English, barely knows how to write, barely knows how to speak it. And so he and his wife go to the library, and they check out a couple of books on presenting in a corporate world, creating a marketing presentation. He copies and pastes some paragraphs that he didn't know what they said, but thought they sounded good. Puts together some slides. He designs a really cool little bag himself and puts the Cheetos in the bag. And they're like, how do we seal this? So they take an iron and they iron the bags closed. And word gets down, because the CEO's not just coming by himself, but he's bringing all of the executives to this meeting. Word gets to his immediate boss, and his immediate boss is pissed. He's like, how dare you? How dare you call him? Who do you think you are, going over our head? Yada, 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 yada. The meeting comes along, and he begins presenting, and he says that there's this marketer in the meeting, and the marketer raises his hand, and he says he looks away. He was trying to ignore. He was like, my wife didn't prepare me to take questions. And he gets towards the end of his presentation, and the marketer still got his hand up, and he's like, hey, Mr. Montañez, I have a question. And he says, how much market share are you going for? And he's like, market share? I don't know what the heck market share is. And he says he almost lost it. He thought that was the end. He thought it was game over. He could only pretend for so long. And then he says he has this idea. He's like, this much market share. This means nothing in a corporate meeting, right? This is not, the dude's looking for a number, 50%, 30%. He wants to know how much of their current market, how much of the market for the spice, for these spicy chips does he want to go for? But the CEO, he says he knows what he meant. He said, we're not going to go on this halfway. We need to go on all the way. That just as he's done since the day that he was mopping the floor, as he's done in this presentation, and as Frito-Lay needs to do in the future, that they have to go all in with their whole heart. They have to commit completely. That is the story of how Flaming Hot Cheetos were created. That Flaming Hot Cheetos were not the result of some think tank with a bunch of highly educated marketers. It wasn't a chef who had a brilliant idea to put chili on chips. It was an uneducated, unexperienced janitor who up until this point only mopped floors. But because he did it with his whole heart, completely changed the rest of his life. To where he tells of after he gets offered a job at Frito-Lay as an executive, and they go and they buy a really nice house, and he tells his gardener, he's like, I want you to take the week off because I'm going to christen my lawn. And so he's out there mowing. He's like, I got an acre in the front lawn. He's out there mowing, and he says one of his neighbors stops by, and he's like, oh, here comes the welcoming committee. Got to bring me some baskets of goodies. But instead, his neighbor rolls down his window, and he says, hey, how much do you charge the owner? He says, I could have taken it as an offense, but I took it as pride. That wasn't where I was anymore. And he said, I don't charge him anything. I just sleep with his wife. The man completely changed his destiny. He completely changed his legacy. And the way that he got there was by doing everything with his whole heart, by putting his heart in everything. And that's, success story after success story. Professional athletes, Olympic athletes, every single one of them, they all have the same thing in common, that what separates them from everyone else is that they do it with their whole heart. That it's a heart thing. That it's all about the heart. And when we talk about a movement of God is all about the heart. And if your heart is in it, then it changes how you move, it changes how you think, it changes decisions that you make. But if your heart isn't in it, then you're always going to be missing something. It's always going to fall short. But when your heart is in it, it makes a dramatic difference. This morning we're going to be in Nehemiah chapter 5. And we're going to look at two sections this morning. And there's a pretty big contrast between these two sections in the response. Just for context, this is within the story that we've been talking about. So this is all taking place as they're seeking to rebuild the Jerusalem wall. So starting in verse 1, it says, "Now there arose a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers. For there were those who had said, with our sons and our daughters, we are many. So let us get grain that we may eat and keep alive. There were also those who said, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses to get grain because of the famine. And there were those who said, we have borrowed money for the king's tax on our fields and our vineyards. Now our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers, our children are as their children. Yet we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters have already been enslaved. But it is not in our power to help it, for other men have our fields and our vineyards." So what's taking place is there are several groups of people who are living in Jerusalem at this time. Some of the people are people of large families, that they've got so many sons and daughters that they can't afford to feed everyone. And so they're going hungry because they can't buy enough grain. And then there are landowners. There are people who have vineyards and fields and homes who are mortgaging their properties, which this wasn't, mortgage is an everyday thing to us, right? It's the only way you buy a house today, but that wasn't how it worked back then. They were mortgaging their fields and their homes in order to pay for grain because there was a drought that was going on. Now, anytime that there's a drought, anytime that there's a famine, what that means is that the need and the supply, that they literally fall off the map, right? The supply drops out and the need skyrockets, which means that the cost of grain goes up and up and up. And so in order to feed their families, they were mortgaging their properties. And then there were other people who were having to take loans, either out on their property or as their children being offered as slaves as collateral if they can't repay the loan, so they could pay the king's tax. Because what's going on is King Artaxerxes at the time, he's collecting a tax, and the only way you can pay taxes with gold or silver coins. But the king wasn't taking the tax and recirculating it. Instead, he was just taking and hoarding it. And so as he did that, the amount of coin and metal that was available was decreasing. And so what people who had large amounts of metal coin were doing is they were charging ridiculous interest rates on these loans. So they wouldn't just get the money that they had given back, but they would get a lot more on top of it. And as a result, many of these families were unable to pay back their loan and were forced to sell their children into slavery. The struggle was real. What was going on was a real issue. It was a real problem. It was something that everyone was dealing with and no one could say wasn't a problem. And it was a real struggle that was taking place within the context of these men and women who were sacrificing a lot in order to rebuild the Jerusalem wall. And so while it would be really nice to say, man, if you decide to take up the task of following God and living to serve Him and building His kingdom and not your own, all of your problems will be gone and taken care of. It would be a lie to say that. Because they're serving Jerusalem. They're serving the city of God. They're seeking to build the kingdom of God. They're participating in this movement, and they're still experiencing problems at home. The struggle is real. For you and I, the difficulties and the challenges of real life don't go away if we say yes to living on mission for the Lord. That bills still have to be paid, mortgages still have to be paid, things still break on your home, water heaters still have to be replaced, cars have to be repaired, dentists and doctors' appointments have to be paid for, and on and on and on and on it goes. That the struggles that we deal with, the day-to-day struggles, that they are real. That there's nothing fake, there's nothing hidden about that, that we all can relate and understand that. That at one point in time, each of us has had an experience where we had a need and didn't necessarily see how that need was going to be taken care of and met. That's where they find themselves today. But the real kicker is who it is that's taking advantage of this really dark situation. Because while the struggle is real, the struggle is also internal. So we continue in verse 6. It says, I was very angry when I heard their outcry in these words. I took counsel with myself, and I brought charges against the nobles and the officials. I said to them, you are exacting interest each from his brother. And I held a great assembly against them and said to them, we, as far as we are able, have bought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations. But you even sell your brothers that they may be sold to us. They were silent and could not find a word to say. So I said, the thing that you are doing is not good. Ought you not to walk in the fear of our God to prevent the taunts of the nations, our enemies? The struggle was internal. Because as the passage starts at the beginning, it says that there was a great outcry against their Jewish brothers. And then in verse 5, it talks about how our flesh, their flesh, the people who are outcrying is the same flesh as those who have the opportunity and the ability to make a change and make a difference. That their children are the same. That their children are the same. The only difference is they're having to sell their children to them in order to get enough food on the table in order to cover their taxes. And so Nehemiah is outraged because here they are giving everything that they have, everything that they can to try and rebuild the wall. And they're supposed to be in support of one another, that they're literally laying down their lives for one another. That's what we talked about last week, that if someone were to attack one section of the wall, that everyone else working was supposed to rally to that point and fight to defend. That whenever you take up the task of fighting a war together, that you are literally being willing to lay down your life for one another. Yet here there's this situation where a need has arisen, that there was a real struggle. And there are people who are within the camp who have the ability to help ease the burden. But instead of taking care of one another, they're taking advantage of one another. And while Nehemiah and the other leaders are trying to get all of the Jews back to Jerusalem, they're trying to buy back the Israelites who have been sold. They're now finding out that they're not just buying them from foreign nations, but they're buying them from foreign nations who bought them from Jews in the first place. The struggle was internal. The problem was within their own camp. This wasn't an attack from the outside. This was a flaw within. This was an issue within their camp. So Nehemiah speaks against them and says, the thing that you are doing is not good. Ought you not to walk in the fear of our God to prevent the taunts of the nations, our enemies? Continues in verse 10, and he says, moreover, I and my brothers, my servants, are lending them money and grain. Let us abandon this exacting of interest. Nehemiah makes clear right here in this first verse what the issue is. It's not that they're lending grain and money. That's not the problem. The problem is that they're not trying to actually help. They're trying to build their own portfolio. They're doing this so that they might amass more personal wealth at the cost of a really difficult situation that their brothers and sisters are walking through. So Nehemiah says, yes, give them money, lend them grain, lend them money, but stop taking this ridiculous interest. Verse 11, he says, return to them this very day their fields, their vineyards, their olive orchards, and their houses. And the proceedings of money, the percentage of money, grain, and wine and oil that you have been exacting from them. Then they said, we will restore these and require nothing from them. We will do as you say. And I called the priests, and I made them swear to do as they had promised. I also shook out the fold of my garment and said, so may God shake out every man from his house and from his labor who does not keep this promise. So may he be shaken out and emptied. And all the assembly said, amen, and praised the Lord. The people did as they had promised. So Nehemiah goes to them and he says, you need to return what you've taken. Return to them their fields. Return to them the supplies, the oils, the grain, the money that you've taken. So they say, we're going to do it. We're going to do just as you've said, and we're not going to take anything or expect anything from them back in return. But Nehemiah wants to make sure that they're going to keep their word. And so he calls the priests and makes them make a vow. And after they've made the vow, then Nehemiah takes the fold of his clothes, which we assume that this was where they would have stored things, that this is a belt or a sash that they would have wore, that is where they would have kept their money and other belongings that they had on their person. And so for him to shake out his fold means that he undid it so that whatever it was that was attached to that sash or that belt would have fallen to the floor, symbolizing what it was that he desired God to do if any of these men break their promise, that they might be emptied of everything that they have as a response to them breaking their promise. He wants them to know that there's going to be a harsh consequence if they don't make this wrong right, which just further goes to show how difficult, challenging, and wrong the situation is, what it is that these men have done, that the consequence would be severe. Then we get to Nehemiah 5:14, and the passage shifts. We've got a contrast between the first 13 verses and verse 14 through 19. So this is what it says. It says, moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year to the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allowance of the governor. The former governors who were before me laid heavy burdens on the people and took from them for their daily ration 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants lorded it over the people. But I did not do so because of the fear of the Lord. I also persevered in the work on this wall, and we acquired no land, and all my servants were gathered there for the work. Moreover, there were at my table 150 men, Jews and officials, besides those who came to us from the nations that were around us. Now what was prepared at my expense for each day was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep and birds, and every 10 days all kinds of wine in abundance. Yet for all this I did not demand the food allowance of the governor, because the service was too heavy on this people. Remember for my good, O my God, all that I have done for this people. So Nehemiah, from the time that he was made governor to the end, 12 years Nehemiah served as the governor. He did not take a pay for his role all 12 years. He did not take what was rightfully his. You see, many people who are in leadership or in appointed positions look for ways that they can get more money, and their main concern is, how can I get more legally? But here Nehemiah is not concerned with how he can get more, but instead his main focus is how he can give everything. And he makes it clear that it's not just that he's not taking this pay, but that his servants, his entire house, The people who are meant to serve and take care of him, that they're not serving his home, but instead that they're at the wall working just like everyone else. And then just to make sure that we fully understand and comprehend what it is that this cost Nehemiah, so that Nehemiah can point to the fact that while he demands that these nobles who have been taking advantage of the Jewish people understand that he's now asking them to do something that he isn't already doing himself. He says, I have 150 people at my table at least every week. And I feed them. And the amount that it costs me a day is I have to sacrifice an ox, 6 sheep, and birds every single day. And then every 10 days, I have to buy large rations of grain and wine. This would have cost him a fortune over years of time. It cost him many resources, and it cost him his house serving other needs. Him serving other needs, being solely and completely focused on rebuilding this wall, on restoring the kingdom of God. And he does it because he cares for the people. He does it because his heart is for the people and his heart is for the work. There's a contrast between verses 1 through 13 and 14 through 19. In verses 1 through 13, the picture that we see is one of greed. It's one of greed. Of the men that are spoken of there, their sole purpose is, how can I get more? How can I build my wealth? How can I build my kingdom? Not caring about the brothers and sisters who are in need around them, but instead just focusing on themselves. And then in verses 14 through 19, we see a beautiful picture of generosity. That Nehemiah, who has things that are rightfully his, is laying them aside so that he might serve the greater purpose. That he is sacrificing something that belongs to him in order to accomplish the greater work that's at hand. This makes me think of Matthew chapter 6. Verses 19 through 21. This is Jesus speaking in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You see, this passage is about money. Surprise! I bet no one in here, when they saw the title, thought that this was going to be a message about money. But that's what's taking place here in this passage. What's taking place is we are given a glimpse at two different ways of moving forward, living and walking out a movement of God. And we're shown that I truly do believe that the reason that Nehemiah and the Israelites had the success that they did was because of generosity. See, movements of God require a surrender of treasure. Now, don't be mistaken. This isn't because God needs your money. This isn't because a movement of God needs to be paid for. God is a God of the cattle on 1,000 hills. God is a God of plenty. God is a God who sustains. We're told over and over in Scripture that we're not meant to worry about what we have to wear, what we have to eat, because God will provide. The only way God provides is because He has it. It belongs to Him and it's His already. And the reality that every single one of us, any money or things that we have, are gifts given by God. That it was God who gave it to us in the first place. That the very things that become gods in our lives, the very things that we end up worshiping over worshiping God, cars, homes, big bank accounts, 401ks, retirement plans, boats, TVs, computers, phones, all of those things that we end up worshiping were at one point in time gifts. That God is the creator of all of those. Sure, someone else might have their name next to it, but it was a God-given idea. And it came as the result of God creating all things. It came as the result of God forming that individual in their mother's womb, giving them the mind that they needed to create these amazing inventions. It came as God creating opportunities for us to take jobs, provide for our homes, and have money to buy those things. Movements of God require a surrender of treasure, but that's not because God needs us to pay for it. It's about the heart. You see, contrary to what some people might be thinking, because I know how it goes. As soon as you start talking about giving and tithing to the church, people are like, you just want me to give you my money. No, I don't. This isn't a ploy to get you to give to Axiom. Do I think the Axiom is worth giving to? 100%. But why? Because my heart's here. Because I believe in this movement of God. And for me, I want my treasure to be where my heart is. My heart is here, so I want my treasure to be here. I want to invest and give in this because this is where I believe God is working and calling me to work. But if it's not where your heart is, then I don't want you to give here. Because it's not about trying to get more money. It's not about trying to fund what's happening. God's already doing it. God funds his vision always. It's about the heart. Where is your heart? I think a great mistake that we can make anytime that we begin talking about money in the church is we can immediately go to passages that talk about the call of the tithe. For those of you who don't know what that is, there's passages in the Old Testament that talk about the tithe, that Abraham was to give a tithe to the Lord. 10% of all that he had was the Lord's. It was returning back to God what he gave as an act of surrender, as an act of obedience. And while I do believe in that, and I do believe it's biblical, I do believe that we are called, I believe that that's walking in obedience, that's not why you give. And if it is the reason that you give, then you give for the wrong reason. Because Jesus comes on the scene in the New Testament and he talks about how we're to have the heart of a cheerful giver. That if your heart isn't in the gift, then you're not giving. That a true act of obedience, a true act of surrender is doing it willingly, not because I have to. So while I think that not giving is wrong, I think giving for the wrong reason is just as wrong. Because it's not about raising money for the Lord. It's about having your heart surrendered, having your money where your heart is, and it being an indication of where your heart is. Jesus made it clear God doesn't want your money, he wants your heart. Over and over and over and over again. That's what's communicated. That's why I love the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7 are absolutely amazing because what it shows is it shows what God is really after. Well, Jesus talks about all of these things, all of these rules that the Pharisees and religious leaders were doing a really good job of keeping these rules. He goes on to show that for God, it's not about the rules, it's about the heart behind the rules. It's about why you submit. He doesn't just talk about divorce and why divorce is wrong and how you shouldn't just divorce your wife for no reason. He talks about the heart behind divorce, of why it's wrong. He doesn't talk about the danger of greed. He talks about what greed leads to. And he doesn't talk about the need for generosity or the requirement for it. Instead, he talks about the heart that it leads to. over and over and over. That's so incredible. And it's in that passage it talks about, you've heard it said, but I say unto you. You've heard it said, a man should not commit adultery. But I tell you that if a man looks at a woman with lustful eyes, he's committed adultery in his heart. Over and over and over, Jesus says, listen, it's not about a set of rules. It's about a God who's after your heart, because if he gets your heart, he has all of you. And the reason that he talks about money is because he knows that one of the things that fights so strong for our heart is money. Why? Because money is attached directly to our need. We all know we need it. Like we said at the very beginning, the struggle is real. There are bills that have to be paid. There's food that has to go on the table, and you have to pay for it somehow. But it's so easy for it to shift from being just a need to recognizing God supplying and meeting your need to being about more. I want more. I need more. And if we're not careful, that more is what leads to really dangerous places. I guarantee that every person who has ever been arrested or is serving a sentence for some form of a legal scam, they didn't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to scam everyone and steal a bunch of money. There were a series of events and a series of choices that were made because their focus was on, I need more. And I'll do whatever I have to get more. It's the same thing that happens here in Nehemiah 5. It wasn't that these leaders who had plenty really wanted to screw over their brothers and sisters. It was that there was an opportunity for them to get more of their primary thing. Their primary focus was just stuff. They saw an opportunity to build their own income. And it wasn't something that they just woke up one day and made that decision. It was over a period of time that their focus and their heart being in the wrong place is what led to it. And so whenever Jesus gets to the end of that passage in Matthew chapter 6, and he says, a man cannot serve two masters. You either serve God or you serve money. It's because he knows the truth, that money isn't the problem, but it's where it can take us if that's our God. And the only way for it not to be is for us to experience a changing and a shifting of our heart. And what's absolutely incredible about this is that the heart falls in line with what we talked about at the very beginning. What breaks your heart? What is the burden that the world has that you see and you say, that's where I need to invest? Because as a child of God, as a worker of the field, as a co-laborer seeking to bring about his kingdom, I'm going to invest in his kingdom, not mine. To where it's not a, hey, you have to do this. And if you don't, you're doing something wrong. It's a, we need to find out where our heart is. And we need to invest in that. To build our treasure up where our heart should be. And maybe our heart's in the wrong place. And what an amazing indicator. What an incredible testimony it can be for us to take the time to ask a really important question. Because instead of saying that you should tithe because it's what you should do, instead I want to ask you a question. Is your money where your heart is? This series, we've been talking a lot about investing our personal time and investing in us all needing to play a role and have a part. Last week we talked about how everyone has to do it, that works of God require everyone giving everything. But we've also got to talk about money too. Because that's part of it as well, that they walk hand in hand. And while I think it's an incredible task to sit down and take a time inventory to look at where am I spending most of my time, because where I spend most of my time reveals what's most important. In the same way, to sit down with our finances and instead of just looking through them through logic-driven eyes, to look through them through spiritual eyes. To ask the question, where is my heart? Indicated by where is my checkbook? Because yes, there's needs and there's things and there's things that are fun to get and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if you're sacrificing giving to the kingdom of God to build your own castle, that's where it's a wake-up call of, you know what, I say my heart is in this, but this is kind of saying something different. Is your money where your heart is? The second question I have, is your giving just a requirement or a move of their heart? Is your giving just a requirement or a move of the heart? Because here's what I don't think is biblical. Here's what I don't think is right. I don't think it's right for us to get up here, to pull on your emotions, to pull on your heartstrings, to manipulate and guilt you into doing something that your heart's not in. And for me, this isn't an Axiom thing. This is a kingdom of God thing. The bottom line is, wherever your heart is, if it's involved in building the kingdom of God, invest in that. If it's here, praise God. That's awesome. We would love to have it. If it's not, if it's building the kingdom of God, we will rejoice. We will celebrate with you because you are walking in obedience. But it needs to be where your heart is. It can't just be a repulsive obedience, because I think that breaks it down and associates so many negative things. And it's not just with giving, it's with many things. Personal time with the Lord, I think, is another really great example of taking something that was meant to be beautiful. This is meant to be edifying, encouraging, and building up. And because in our mind, all we're thinking about is, I have to do this, it becomes this resented task that I no longer go to Scripture excited for the word that God has for me, but I look at it as a checklist that I just have to get done. So I no longer look forward to it. I resent it. And the same can happen with giving. The same can happen with generosity. Instead of looking forward to the opportunity to invest in what it is that God is doing, instead of looking forward to the opportunity to respond in obedience, to respond in gratitude with a thankful heart, knowing that God has given me everything, I look at it as something that I have to do, and I resent doing it. And I miss it. I miss the whole reason I'm doing it. Miss the whole reason that God is calling me to do it. It's a heart thing. It's not about the money. Movements of God don't need fundraisers. They need hearts surrendered. That's what it needs. That's what we need. That's what Axiom.Church needs. That's what the movement that God has placed on your heart, the way He's calling you to live and move and work in your own life, that's what He needs. That's what it was. That's what it was that Nehemiah had. You see, Nehemiah didn't look at these other nobles frustrated that he's giving and they're not. He looks at them and he knows. He knows their heart's in the wrong place, and he knows his is in the right place. It's a heart thing. Is my money where my heart is? Am I only giving because I have to, or am I giving because that's where my heart is? God needs my heart. That's what He wants. That's what He's after. God needs your heart. That's what he wants. That's what he's after. In just a minute, I'm going to pray, and after I pray, the band is going to come out, and they're going to lead us in the final song. During the final song is an opportunity for us to respond. We have communion here at the front and as well as in the back. Communion service is an incredible reminder for many, many things. And I don't think there's been a week since we started in January that I found myself like, I don't know how communion attaches to this. Communion is taking a moment to remember what it is that Jesus has done. The price that he's paid for you and I to be made right with God. That the juice represents his blood, which was shed for the forgiveness of our sins. The bread represents his body, which is broken for us. What I absolutely love, what I love about Scripture, what I love about our God is that our God is not a God who asks us to do something that he's not willing to do himself or already done himself. We serve a very, very generous God who beyond just the everyday blessings, that if we were to sit down and count and think and remember, it would dramatically change how we think about our lives. If we took a moment to just think about the ways that God truly has blessed us and continues to bless us every single day. But then as if that wasn't enough, he was willing to lay down his life for you and for me. As we celebrate and as we remember that's where our mind needs to go. Remembering the price that Jesus paid. And if what he's asking in return is I surrender my life and my heart to him, then it's worth it. It's worth it. And we can step into it knowing that we serve a God who is full aware of our needs and the difficulties of life. Scripture says that we don't serve a God who cannot relate to our needs and our brokenness, but one who has gone through it all and overcome the world. But whenever God calls us to surrender our hearts, to trust him with our treasures, to focus on his kingdom, and by doing that he'll make sure we have everything else that we need, he says that knowing the difficulties of the day, but knowing the blessing and the fruit that comes in response to obedience. And it's not that we get rewards. But it's that our lives are full. Our hearts are full. The emptiness that we can find in so many other areas, so many other focuses, so many other path choices. That we don't have to live in that, but that we can live in the fullness of God. The song that we're going to close out with today is a new song. And it's called There's a Cloud. And when they were writing the song, and thinking about the story in 1 Kings where Elijah is on Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal. And the story goes that Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal, saying, you know, we're going to find out who the real God is. Either you're Baal or my almighty God. So they construct an altar, put an offering on it, but they don't light the offering on fire. Instead, they're told that they have a chance to cry out to their God and ask him to send a pillar of fire down and consume the offering. So the prophets of Baal, they go first, and they're doing all kinds of stuff, and they work, and Elijah's just chilling, taunting. He's just making fun of them the whole time. But the entire time they're doing it, all that they do, nothing happens, no response. And then Elijah steps up, and he has people pour a bunch of water on the altar and on the offering, so that there's no one that can say, there's a spark. The rocks started it. It wasn't really God. So much water so that they dug a trench around the altar and it literally filled the trench with water. And then Elijah calls out and prays to God, and the pillar of fire comes down and consumes the stones and the offering. And what's really funny, it kind of like describes the water. It talks about how the fire licks up the water. It's just funny. I don't know why. I find it amusing. Fire licking things. It's not a cat. That's not going to feel good. That's what happens. But many times that becomes the focal point of the story, and that's really not the focus of the passage. That there's a really long narrative that's taking place where there was a king who took a queen that he shouldn't have. And she led that king astray, and as happens with leadership, when the leader is astray, the people follow. And so the people of God end up leaving God and worshiping this false idol, this false god called Baal. And so Elijah proclaims that there's going to be a famine, there's going to be a drought across the land as a result of the king leading the people astray. So there's been this drought for a really long time, and Elijah's running from the queen because she's trying to take his life, and finally comes to this place that challenges these priests of Baal, and God responds, and the people of God see the response, and they come back to him and end up like slaughtering all of the prophets of Baal, which, that kind of gets left out of the story usually too, but it's what happens. The Old Testament is gruesome. But the focus isn't on God's response with the pillar of fire. Instead, it's on what the land needed was rain. The land needed rain. And the only one who could supply that rain was God. So after this amazing showdown, Elijah begins praying. And he prays 7 times. And each time he prays, he sends his servant to go and check to see if there's any clouds. And 7 times he prayed, and 6 times the servant returns and says, no, there's nothing. On the 7th time, he sends the servant away, and the servant sees this tiny cloud in the distance. And he comes back to Elijah, and he tells him, and Elijah says, go to the king and tell him that there's rain coming. And sure enough, by the time Elijah is on his way back to the kingdom, a torrential downpour starts. And what the land desperately needed is given. So the focus of the song is, there may be a drought right now, but if we're faithful, stay focused, keep seeking the Lord, the promises of Scripture remain true. There will be a day that Christ will return, that every knee will bow, that every tongue will confess. There is a day that is coming that all sickness will be healed, that no one will be in pain. There will be constant joy and singing. There is a time that all suffering will cease. There's a time that there's no longer these tortuous leaders who lead astray, cause problems, take advantage of. There's no longer going to be a struggle of sin, a fight against flesh, but there's going to be a glorious return whenever the Almighty sits on the throne and heaven and earth are made his footstool, and we get to bask in his eternal presence forever. And then when we meet, and we gather, and we strive, and we work, and we try to build a church, and we try to build kingdoms of God, and we ask the questions, God, where are you moving? What are you doing? And we join in on them. They are a glimpse. It is a tiny cloud on the horizon that we know and we can declare with true and clear conscience. There's a cloud that's beginning to swell. There is rain that is coming. It is what we need. It is what's desperately needed in our land, in our area, in our community. And it's coming. And it's coming. We can hold true to it. We can claim it. We can hold fast. We can trust. We can trust that in all things and all ways that our God who is good is moving. And he's coming. And he's preparing. And if we're willing, we're open and we're surrendered. That we, like Elijah, like Nehemiah, like Paul, like Matthew, many other people before us, can join God in his movement to build his kingdom. See what God could do whenever his church, his people are surrendered to him, trusting with their heart, trusting with their own, and waiting for the rain that's coming. So I'm going to pray. The band is going to lead us, and during this final song is an opportunity for you to respond. As you feel led, I invite you to come forward, take communion. If you need prayer, want want to talk, anything. I'm going to be in the back. Come and grab me. I would love to talk with you. I would love to pray with you. I'll pray, and the man is going to lead us out. Heavenly Father, we thank you. God, we thank you for today. God, we thank you that you are God, that you are able. God, that you're able to take our imperfect, our unfinished example of your body, God, and do mighty things. God, we thank you for chasing our hearts, because we know we need you. And we know that you've done it only out of love and a desire to connect and know us. So, Father, I ask that you would help us each and every day as we walk with you to surrender more and more to you, more and more to your plan. God, that we would find more ways with both our time, our talents, and our treasures, God, to invest in your kingdom and not our own. God, that by being people who declare that we are your followers, God, that we truly would follow you. That we would live to serve you, live to serve your kingdom, not our own. God, I thank you for the promise that you are coming, you are moving, you are working. Father, that no matter what's going on today, God, that we can hold fast to the promise that when we're obedient and we follow you, while things might still be challenging and difficult, because your word says that when we seek first the kingdom of God, all else will be added. Your promises never fall short. It might look different than what we thought, but they never fall short. Father, give us the boldness that we need to walk in obedience. God, claim our hearts, that we might live in service to you. So in your precious and holy name, I pray these things.
Amen. Let's stand up one more time as we prepare to respond. Hear the word roaring as thunder, with a new future to tell. For the dry season is over, there is a cloud beginning to swell. To the skies, heavy with blessing, lift your eyes, offer your heart. Jesus Christ, open the heavens, now we receive Spirit of God. We receive your breath. We receive your breath. Every seed buried sorrow, you will call forth in its time. You are Lord, Lord of the harvest, calling our home now to arise. We receive your breath. We receive your breath. anticipation, we await the promise to come. Everything that you have spoken will come to pass. Let it be done. Thank you so much for worshiping with us this week. Have a great one.